way I define education is when you discover something and then it provides you more freedom than anything else. And so I found the whole experience of delving deeper into what finances are really hit a chord with me. And especially, and the weird thing is tied back to my work in nonprofit world is that I couldn't quite put my finger on what the issues are for some people who are facing poverty. And finances is that number one issue. But when it comes to finances, we all need to be comfortable with it, and we all need to be able to match it up to who we are as individuals, as families, as a community. Because if there is a disagreement in regards to your values and your finances, then it's going to show up in other ways.
This is the Personal Finance Show.
Hi, I'm Bo Humphreys, and this is the Personal Finance Show. Mr. Prairie Fire wants you to discover something about yourself by knowing your finances. Mr. Prairie Fire, let's call him Fred, is an anonymous financial independence retire early, also known as the FIRE movement, F-I-R-E, blogger in the prairies of Western Canada at prairiefirecanada.com. Fred calls his discovery of the FIRE movement his financial enlightenment. After surviving 3 large financial crises in a very short time period, he was determined to take control of his finances. Specifically, Fred was drawn to the FIRE movement and the freedom that financial independence promises. Fred joined me from somewhere in Saskatchewan to tell his personal finance story.
So yeah, I guess when it comes to money and really understanding money was probably when I encountered my first job, just understanding the ins and outs of life. When I was in university, I was lucky enough that my parents were able to pay for my school. So that was quite some time ago in the 90s. And so when you get that first job, it's always a challenge to be able to meet your obligations and budget. And unfortunately, they didn't have budgeting 101 classes in university. So I sort of learned on my own. My parents still instilled in me the ability to save. But I think for me, going into the real world and understanding how money affects your life was probably my first encounter when I got my first real job, and that was in the nonprofit world. That was actually an interesting experience as well, where I worked in nonprofit organizations helping those who are in poverty. And so realizing the importance of money, how it can impact your life if you have it and when you don't, and seeing the impacts directly through my work was actually really influential to make me more of a saver than a spender.
That's interesting because you're learning about money for the first time, but you're also seeing people who don't have a lot of it, and maybe they also don't know anything about money either.
I think for them it's the challenge of doing the day to day, especially if you don't have much of it.
Yeah,
it becomes even more important, right?
So school was paid for completely, and you really didn't have any expenses like up until this point. What province are we talking about here?
So it's Saskatchewan.
So you're in Saskatchewan. You went to school there too?
Yeah, I went to school at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon and just stayed there and started work right away.
Nice. So what was your degree in?
My undergrad was in sociology and psychology, so real practical degrees when you go into the real world.
Well, for human beings, but like not jobs, not specific jobs, I guess.
Yeah, not from a tactical perspective. You know?
But very, very useful in any job.
I think so. It gave me a really interesting perspective of how people think and work, but also how larger systems work when it comes to even finances, where money comes from, where the jobs are at, how to help people to navigate even working with government and stuff like that. It's been useful my entire life and has allowed me to think beyond just the simple day to day. And I love thinking like strategically and broadly. So I was a geek that way and still am.
Yeah. So you come out of university with this sociology, psychology. You said undergrad. Does that mean you continued in school?
Yeah, a few years later when I was, I started taking on more and more responsibilities. I had overseen affordable housing projects when it comes to rental projects and also housing co-ops. And I just felt like I didn't have that business acumen and the ability to look in regards to, budgeting from a strategic perspective. So I decided to apply for an MBA and got that in 2010 was when I finished.
Well, that's awesome. So, okay, so let's step back then. You're coming out with sociology and psychology. You're applying for jobs. And did you know that you wanted to be working? So it was like, can you describe again what it was, low-income housing?
Yeah, so I worked for a nonprofit organization that provided affordable housing for low-income families.
How did you get into that? Was it just applying to a bunch of different jobs?
Just applying to jobs. I had a real heart in regards to helping people, so the nonprofit world was quite appealing.
Sure.
And to be totally honest, it was someone took a chance on me. They said, this guy has potential. He's passionate. And so they brought me under their wing. And then they said, the great thing about working in the nonprofit world is that they don't care if you have a degree. They'll throw you anything. And if you jump into it and do it well, then that's what you do.
Well, that's great. They just want someone who is passionate about helping, and that was you. Okay, so you get in there, and you said you're learning about being on your own. So you ended up getting a place of your own somewhere, or did you have a place already? Like, were you in residence at university, or?
So I was living on my own when I did apply for the job. And so, I had the regular expenses, rent, food, transportation, but I lived a pretty simple life, which I found very valuable because, like I said, I wasn't very much of a spender. So I was already in the mentality of saving my income, but I just didn't know what to do with it, right? It just sat there.
So you were able to save, so you're frugal already, so you're able to put some money away, but it was just sitting maybe just in a regular, checking account or savings account?
Yeah, like a low interest bearing savings account, and didn't really have an idea of investing or where to put money. And so, for a long time, I mentioned this on my site, is that, that was one of my big mistakes, is that I was able to save this money, but I wasn't invested in any way.
We don't have to fast forward, but how many years of investing or productivity do you think you missed out on?
Oh, I'd say at least probably 8 or 9 years. And this was probably between the years of 2006 to 2013, 14.
Really, that many?
That was, yeah, it was a decent amount of time. I did have some RSP contributions that I was making through, financial advisor, but that wasn't optimized either. So I had some regular contributions that I put into the market, but my savings rate was much higher than what my RSP contributions were.
Yeah, and is this because your parents, they taught you to be frugal, they taught you to save, obviously, and that's all you knew? That's
all I knew. I just knew I had to save. I just didn't know what to do.
And that's not bad. It's not a bad thing, saving versus spending. That's kind of the starting point, right? Like, let's make sure we're there, and then let's have more conversations about what to do with it. But was it the lack of resources, or was it your lack of curiosity, or what do you think it was that stopped you from finding out what to do?
I think it was mostly the lack of resources and information. It's a pretty intimidating topic, specifically because the financial industry makes it complicated, and there's this barrier to entry to understand even what money is and what it can do versus just like your day-to-day spending. So for me, even though I was frugal, I wasn't necessarily delving into investing because I thought, that's just for the experts, and I'm not going to go there, and I'm just going to live my life and just move forward and focus on other things.
Yeah, you got to be like a stock trader or someone who looks at the Globe and Mail business section every day, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But you did end up getting your MBA. Did that kind of push you towards any personal finance knowledge?
I found it very useful to understand how the finance world works, specifically the stock market, what it means in context of how people are seeing the value of a particular company. And so that sort of spurred my idea of looking beyond just my day-to-day and understanding, like from a, that big thinking perspective, that there's all this going on and the ability to invest in this activity and how the general economy is constantly improving and productivity is going up. And I'm not necessarily benefiting from that productivity. It's very passive. So I decided to go down that road a little bit. So at the same time, trying to finish my MBA and just understanding where that all lies. So it's quite useful from an educational perspective.
Yeah. So what was your first step in sort of stepping out of the, pure saving, other than the RSP stuff that you had going on the side? What was one of the first things you did?
I think one of the first things I did is when I got a steady job after my MBA and basically putting my money into a pension savings plan, right? So I was able to work as a policy analyst with the provincial government, and making sure I was maxing that out because they were matching it, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's an automatic win in regards to you're instantly doubling your investment, which, that's incredibly hard to find in the market. So that was one of my major moves to make sure I was maxing out those contributions. And then when it came to the performance of my RSP, just sitting down with a financial advisor and getting more in depth of understanding my risk appetite and being able to invest accordingly. I started out quite conservative, but as I got more confident, I was willing to delve deeper and take a bit more risk. Given that I had a longer time horizon than someone who is maybe in their 50s or 60s.
Mm-hmm. That's usually recommended if you have 30 to 40 years. Just there's no issue with putting it in a highly volatile section of the market, or a balanced fund that is more volatile than others, because the volatility, it all really kind of evens itself out over those decades. So when you looked at your existing RSP situation, did you find that you just had it invested in something you maybe didn't know about or want to invest in?
At first, I tried to think of like the type of areas that I thought would be beneficial. So a lot of them were tied up in mutual funds.
Yeah.
And so I think what I like to call my financial enlightenment happened as a result of maybe some financial shocks that really hit my life. So, when you're busy in life, during this time, I got married, we bought a home together, myself and my wife, and we had our first child in a rather short amount of time. So all that takes up all your bandwidth, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, my story is really about taking on some major financial difficulties that we faced as a family. So we had bought our dream home and we were super happy about it. And then, sort of a nightmare scenario where we had to replace our entire roof within the first year.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so that was devastating in the sense that we weren't really prepared to drop between $15,000 and $18,000 right on the spot. So we had to, rally and do our due diligence to find financing to get that done. And that was probably the biggest debt I've ever taken other than the mortgage. And the job that I'm in right now, I'm in my dream job. I'm doing great work, but, you get sometimes with companies, they restructure. And I was lucky to keep my job, but I found out I was getting a 9% pay cut.
Oh, no.
So that hit us financially as well. And then the third one is that I own some investment rental property with my dad, and we oversee a lot of the activities. My dad's very passive in that sense. And then, we had the major rainstorm in Saskatchewan, and there was some flooding. And so we had to find money for that as well. And that was about a $10,000 hit to us. So just like that, I had a pay cut, $25,000 in debt in less than a year. And so super stressed. And that's sort of my journey where I said, I need to better understand what's going on from a financial perspective for us personally and getting our financial house in order, but also just being able to educate myself. And as a result, I just put in Google financial independence, and I just delved into this weird and wonderful world of financial independence and retire early community, and I was hooked. And that's where I feel like my education really started, right? And the way I define education is when you discover something and then it provides you more freedom than anything else. And so I found the whole experience of delving deeper into what finances are really hit a chord with me. And especially, and the weird thing is tied back to my work in nonprofit world is that I couldn't quite put my finger on what the issues are for some people who are facing poverty. And finances is that number one issue. Yeah, that's sort of the background of where my education really started and understanding all the different aspects to it.
Yeah, so you said financial independence, retire early, which is also known as FIRE, and that's the title of your site. It's Prairie FIRE, right?
Yeah, it's Prairie FIRE Canada.
Prairie FIRE Canada. What's the website? Yeah. It's a little premature,
so
but we'll mention it now.
PrairieFireCanada.com.
Yeah, so that's where you hang out, and you're Mr. Prairie FIRE.
Yeah, and I started that in February of 2018, so still relatively new to the blogging game, but it's just a sort of a little bit of a diary and insights of my journey and my education, and just discovering things and just letting other people come along with me on my journey to discovering financial independence.
A lot of people might have done what you did and go to Google and figure out financial independence or just like how to take care of my money, but not everyone would land on the FIRE movement. What specifically drew you to that? Because it's sort of a specific, it's specific, but with various permutations. But the idea is to try to gain financial independence as early as you can. Correct?
Yeah, I think even though it was a little bit by accident, I think what really attracted me was the whole idea of frugalness, which where I was already at, and the ability to understand why to be frugal, right? Some people are frugal because it's just a habit and how they're brought up. But similar to what happened to me is I didn't know the reason why, what motivated you, other than seeing your bank account grow is a great feeling for some, but there is no intrinsic value or something that drives you. And so what appealed for the FIRE movement specifically was it was about freedom. Mm-hmm. It was about being able to have more control and not feel like you're a victim to the circumstances that happened to you. For example, those 3 financial shocks I felt, that really kicked me in the head, and being able to be like, I feel like I'm not in control and my freedom is at risk, because the more debt you get into, that means the money that you're earning and working hard for is going to someone else. And that does not sit well with me, and I'm sure it doesn't sit well with most people, to know that you're working for someone else other than yourself. Yeah,
it doesn't sit well with me. That's why I don't do that anymore.
No.
But it doesn't provide as steady a paycheck.
Yeah, I think for me, it's I still work regular 9 to 5 sort of job, but when I looked at where my money was going to, it was going towards debt instead of the goals that I had for myself and my family.
Interesting.
Right? And so being able to understand what's going on there, and putting it in the light of the financial independence retire early movement, I was able to say to myself, I want to join this movement specifically for myself and my family because it really matched who I was and my values, but also the ability to have more freedom as I go along, right? So I'm still getting my financial house in order, but for the purpose of freedom, not just because it's so I can start being frugal again, but rather being more missional and perspective.
Yeah, it's hard for a lot of people to save without any kind of motivation. And I guess the question I have is, do you have in your mind a scenario, have you replayed it? How would you have handled this year of financial trouble differently if you would have been more knowledgeable before? Or did you just have to go through this?
In retrospective, I think it's something that I had to go through. Mm-hmm. I think that's basically how humans work, to be totally honest. Sometimes something bad has to happen in order to change your perspective, because there's so many things that are trying to get your attention that sometimes when a bad thing happens, it makes you focus. And fortunately, I was able to stumble onto this particular movement. And so that's sort of what inspired me to start the website as well, is that hopefully someone else stumbles onto this, because what I was discovering is that so many people are facing this situation, and the stats are staggering where 50% of Canadians are worried about where their money is going. The latest news is showing that people can't handle an emergency of $400 or more. And so they're also tackling these issues on their own. And 50% are not talking about it with their friends or family or anyone around them. So it's especially lonely for folks who are living in the prairies, where we're a bit more spread out and isolated, but we don't necessarily talk about these things. And so, the reason I started this site is that I started talking openly with other people in my community and my workplace, and they just kept asking questions. And so I'm like, I'm just going to start a site. And hopefully, the people who are interested that are in my community can read it, but someone else can stumble onto it and gain something out of my own experience.
Yeah, that's really great because, as you said, people don't talk about it. Do you have any insight from what people have mentioned to you, in terms of asking you questions? Why is it that we don't talk about money as much as we could?
for some people, it's a hard topic, especially if they're going through difficulties. There's always that persona that you want to put forward that you have your stuff together, right?
Yeah.
And so, their questions are more about wanting to know more about my situation, because I feel like the more they hear about me not having my stuff together, they're like, oh, okay, it's like I'm not the only one. This is especially true for younger people who are just starting out. I find when I have conversations with people who are just coming out of university or just starting their career, they're just hungry. They're so hungry for the information, but they want it in a format that speaks to them. And so just having that dialogue in person is actually quite impactful, because it frees them up from feeling uncomfortable. And I'm finding they're now talking with other people about finances and not being afraid to talk about it. And when that happens, that's a game changer for us as Canadians, right?
Yeah, I mean, I like your idea of that maybe you couldn't have prevented what happened to you, but you can try to prevent it from happening to someone else with knowledge and discussion.
I think that's essential. We're all going to have financial struggles. That's inevitable. But being prepared is pretty much the allows you to be free from debt. For me, no one really talked to me about having an emergency savings fund.
Yeah,
right?
that's
I was saving like crazy into my RSP, had a little bit of savings for, if I wanted to get a new vehicle or whatnot, but those big things where you may lose your job and having so many amounts of savings, that's something that was never told to me ahead of time. And if I knew at an early stage, oh man, it'd be a very different story.
I feel like I talk about it so much now, but maybe it falls on deaf ears a lot. Sometimes, do you think you were always ready to hear it? Or was there a certain time in your life when you were like, okay, now I'm ready, but I'm not hearing it?
I think for me, repetition's key.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So just hearing it one time sort of washes over you, right? Like people throw numbers at you, for example, getting the 25 times your annual expenses. I'm like, what does that even mean? Right?
Yeah. That's a fire thing, right?
From a fire perspective, like you'll hear that and be like, what in the world are you talking about? And I would get some of those sort of comments. I get the side eye, just be like, what are you talking about? But I think if it's put in a story and a narrative instead of just numbers, people can glob onto those type of things, and that repetitive sort of exposure to it will allow people to be more comfortable. And then when they are ready, then it'll hit them even deeper, right? So you have to be ready, but I think there also has to be a larger, constant story of people talking about these type of things.
Yeah, let's keep telling stories. That's what this podcast is about. Then eventually, people will start listening. Maybe they don't even think that any of it applies to them, but one day it might, and we will have been out there spreading the word as long as we can. Yeah. So you said the 25 times your expenses. Maybe if you could give everyone just a brief description of what the FIRE movement is all about, and maybe if you have a specific spin on it yourself.
I think with the FIRE movement, it's a sort of a sub niche of personal finance, and they really focus on the ability to save. So frugalness is key. And so I think the most common word that they use is creating the gap between how much money you make, your income, and the expenses that you have. So creating a larger gap. So either increasing your income, but also perhaps reducing your expenses. And at the same time, using that gap, so that's the savings rate. It could vary from 10% to 80%, depending on your situation. But using your savings to purchase cash flowing or appreciating assets. Right. So those could be stocks, bonds, usually in the stock market. I personally delve into more of index assets. So either ETFs or exchange traded funds, or some actual mutual funds that follow a particular index, but actually building your portfolio. Right. And your portfolio should reach a certain size where you can actually declare financial independence. And so that your portfolio, depending on what that number is for you, people usually say your portfolio has to be 25 times your annual expenses for that. And so the FIRE movement uses that principle to identify when you're financially independent, and hopefully grow so much that you may have the opportunity to decide whether you want to keep working or not. where you understand your portfolio is making enough money per year to cover your expenses that you don't have to worry about money at that point.
And the 25 times, is that because, like, let's say the number for a lot of people is $1 million, right? So is that like the 4% rule, in that $1 million at 4% will generate 40,000 if that happens to be your expenses?
Yeah, exactly. And so you have to understand your budget. You have to, that's key in your first step. And once you have a good idea of your budget, I call it getting your financial house in order, then you can start thinking about creating that gap, but also how big your portfolio needs to be. So for your example, 4% in $1 million is 40,000. And if that's your number, then, theoretically, and this is based on what we call the 4% withdrawal rate, where people can take away 4% of the size of their portfolio, but their portfolio is consistently growing in value, that it won't actually touch your principal $1 million, right?
So you're never taking out any of the principal,
or your net worth.
Okay, you're never taking any of it out, and it's not. So it's not the idea that you're going to live another, 25 years, and if you don't have any, and then you put it in something really safe so that you can take 40,000 out a year, and then you're good.
Yeah, like this is where you have to understand your situation, your risk appetite. So if you are in something more conservative, the 4% withdrawal rate might actually be too high, right? In just regards to what that's producing every year.
Yeah.
And so this is where getting financial advisory help would really be beneficial for people. It's not that popular in the FIRE movement to go to financial advisors.
Costs money, right?
I usually encourage going to someone who is like a fee-based one rather than getting off your actual portfolio, and they can provide you some information on, as long as you know what your goals are and you're clear, they'll be able to give you some advice on what's the best plan for you over the long term. Because you also have to take into consideration that, your situation may change, where if you do have kids, they're going to move out. So your expenses are going to be lower. But as you get older, you're going to have health issues. So you have to understand that your health expenses are going to go up. So being able to plan, and it does take work, but it's not as hard as intimidating as people understand it. And that once you have the understanding of the basics, you can actually do a lot on your own, but just bring on people onto your team to be able to support you. And sometimes that's through a professional.
Yeah, definitely, especially if you're trying to achieve a certain goal. I mean, there's no harm in talking to somebody. I usually quote Carl Richards in that, the financial advisor or financial coach is the thing between you and stupid. And we all need that, no matter how knowledgeable we think we are. You could use some guidance so that you don't make some emotional move. Yeah, in terms of your situation, like, are you close, or are you just on your way there?
I'm still starting out.
You're just
so like
beginning.
I said,
yeah.
one of the key things is getting your financial house in order. Those three specific financial shocks happened last year.
That was last year. Okay, I didn't realize how.
That was last year.
Okay.
So I'm still recovering, but I'm motivated, right? And so we've been able to get a good steady savings rate of 15% of my income. We're a one-income family right now. So for that situation, once we're done raising our kids and being able to get them into school, we'll have a second source of income through my wife, right? So that'll increase our savings rate significantly. So making sure that we're meeting our goals in the short term has been pretty big. I do have a number which is about 1.46 million to cover about $60,000 per year. If I was to get to that number, that would be great, but I'm nowhere close to that. I would say, I'm probably about the $250,000 mark, and that's because I have some investment in real estate, so that's sort of a distorted figure. But when it comes to my portfolio, I want my portfolio of assets to be at that $1.46 million mark.
Yeah, and let's go back. You said you didn't have a lot of investing education, but you did get some properties. When did that happen?
So that happened soon after I got married with my wife. So that was about 6 years ago. And my wife owned a condo, and so she moved in with us, and so we started cut our teeth on that and renting that out.
Okay, yeah.
And then my dad was interested in purchasing some property. So he asked me if I wanted to go in with him. So we were lucky enough to get that. And so I'm very much a rookie real estate investor, but the benefit of the FIRE movement is that there's a number of people who are involved in rental properties. And so just one thing I benefited like in such a significant way was going on Facebook and joining one of these groups and just asking the dumbest questions I could to just understand all the different aspects of financial independence. And there's a great community when it comes to being a rental property investor. And so I've learned a lot over the past year. I've read probably about 7 or 8 real estate investment books, and I probably 4 or 5 like financial personal finance books. And so I'm knee deep in it. I love geeking out on it. So it's been a great experience.
You're doing index investing and you have a couple of properties. Is there a way or recommendation? Like, is real estate the faster way, or is it just, kind of diversify across the board and it'll take some time?
I think diversity is key. Real estate is always something people should consider, but there's different paths to financial independence. And I think that's one of the great things about the FIRE community. It's quite diverse. Mm-hmm. It's not just one type of person. And the one thing that I found intimidating about the FIRE movement is that diversity. And it's quite decentralized, and like there's no one body of authority of financial independence, retire early. So what I did is I sort of created a mini roadmap on my site, and I call it the 5 personas of FIRE. Okay. And so it just highlights the different paths that you can go. For the super frugalists, like, I created a section called the Mustachians, right? There's Mr. Money Mustache, sort of like the persona that everybody knows in the community, that he's got his strong views, he's philosophically stoic, but he has some great information on how you can just use your existing situation to reach financial independence. And then I have different personas, like the person who's a land baron who loves real estate. There's the investor perspective, of people who like to delve deeper into investing and even choosing stocks or dividend paying stocks. And then there's people who like to side hustle, right? People who have their 9 to 5, but they have a little extra on the side to build up their portfolio and use that as the second source of income. And then there's for those, people who are what I like to call the home economists, who are managing their home and maybe staying home to raise their kids, and they're able to manage their home so efficiently, like a business, that they're able to get great savings rates. There's all these different ways of getting there, and that's what I loved about it. And that's what I wanted to write about, is just understanding the community that way.
Do you read a lot of Money Mustache stuff?
That was probably one of the first websites that I checked out. And just being able to understand, there's one post of like the simple math of like getting to financial independence, and he provides like a graph and chart on how long it would take for you if you had a certain savings rate. Mm. And that just blew my mind, right? No one had talked about it that way. Where I'm just like, if I save 15% of my income, I could retire in 40 years. But if I take up to 25%, I can retire in 25 years, right? And so being able to see that visualized was a game changer for me.
Well, how old was he when he retired? Like technically, financially independent. FIRE.
Technically? I'm not sure, to be totally honest. I think for him, it was probably in his late 30s.
Yeah, and because he still seems pretty young. He was one of the first people to popularize this or make it known that it was a possibility, right? Yeah,
exactly. And because of his work and his blog, it's sort of had this reverberation across personal finance and people's lives.
And of course, he's anonymous. I mean, I don't know his name. Maybe you can find it now, but I don't know his name, and I don't know your name. I mean, we know it's Fred. But can you talk about that aspect of it? FIRE bloggers tend to be anonymous because of the retire early aspect of it. If somebody reads about that and they are your boss, they may think you're just about to go.
That's a good point. Like for Mr. Money Mustache, I think most people know him and they know him as Pete, but I think the reason I'm semi-anonymous is the fact that I don't want it to make it about myself.
Okay.
I want to be able to provide a platform where I can tell my story But my story is unique, but it's also common for people in regards to the emotions, the struggles, the mistakes. Like I try and be as honest as possible about my mistakes and that I'm still learning. And in regards, I talk to my friends and family about, my blog, and, I have like people subscribing who are from my work, and I've never shied away from talking about it. Because once again, I don't want it to be a subject that people find hard or difficult to talk about. But rather I want people to use my site just to discover and like find their own path. And so, I wanted to be semi-anonymous just in regards to respect to my own family and things like that, but also just in respect to being able to encourage people to get to know my situation, my personal story, but just being able to provide a platform for people to learn more.
I like that way of looking at anonymity. I mean, it's not, because a lot of people, in addition to the not revealing it to their existing employer, the other reasons would be, if you're posting, do you post income updates and stuff like that? Do you post numbers?
I don't do the regular income updates. Mm-hmm. I'm sort of focusing on my whole theme is discovering the FIRE community, right? Sure, and some of the insights that I'm gaining. So if there is an insight that's very much about, say, my budget, then I'll talk about my budget, right? And just like the different tactics that I found out that someone said, or something like the different ways to budgeting. When it talks about my portfolio, I'm honest about where I'm investing. I haven't done anything in regards to net worth per se. I only bring that up if it's relevant. So a lot of people like to use their blogs as a way of being accountable to other people, right? So it keeps them on the path.
Yeah.
Mine is more about discovery. So if there is something specific to say, doing my net worth, then being able to say how close am I to getting to my financial independence number, then I usually do updates that way, but not on a regular basis.
You're just removing your persona, or your, a brand, or you as a person. You want to just share the story.
Yeah, I want to share the story and insights, because a lot of it, I call like I said, my financial enlightenment, where you actually discover something about yourself by knowing your finances. Like, I think that's valuable in the storytelling than just the numbers, right? If I just reported my net worth and I'm not providing any insights, then what value am I actually adding to the community, right? And so I find my sort of insightful posts probably my most popular, and just people being realizing alongside with me, it's like, oh, what does it mean to live a life where your life is compounding, right? The whole idea of compounding interest applies to finances, but it also applies to life, right? So if you make decisions, it has a compounding effect, either positively or negatively. And so, sort of bridging the finance to practical living type of perspective has allowed me to be like, oh man, I need to think about my decisions, not just in my investments, but my relationships, my skill set, all those things, because there's compounding effects, because that's how the world works, both in a financial perspective, but socially, environmentally too.
Can you give an example of that? I think I like what you're saying. What's an example of compounding outside of the finances?
I think the most obvious one is health, right? So if you are walking every day, are you going to see the impact right away? Probably not. Good point, yeah. Right? But it compounds in itself in regards, you start going for a walk for 20 minutes a day, and you think to yourself, well, that was really good experience after, the 10th or 12th time. Maybe I'll walk 30 minutes, right? Or maybe I'll start running, because I know that my body can do this, and your body reacts, and all of a sudden you are more disciplined, and it's compounding, because then all of a sudden you start getting interested in how your body works, or you want to know if it's possible to join a running club. And so that compounds health-wise, and you won't see the results maybe 30 or 40 years from now, but the impacts are there. And same with education, and also when it comes to giving back to your community. And sometimes a compounding interest may not have a result on you. It may have a result on other people, right? And thinking of the compounding impact of community coming together and sharing knowledge and creating friendships and doing things together, right? Right now we face problems that we're all very individualized. When we come together, the results are, exponential, and that has compounding effects in a positive way.
I love this concept.
So that's just an example.
This is really a great concept that people can apply to their lives, in general. What I'm doing might not have immediate results, and that's okay. But how do people get this perspective? Do they have to go through? Do we all just have to go through the challenging bits to learn?
I think, and this is where it goes back to, I think people are built to take on challenges. And so for us, like, problem solving is sort of something that we as people really like to do, because then we find that we're mastering things. For me, my path started on some major challenges. How I reacted to those challenges is really what's important. So if you've lived a life that's relatively comfortable and there hasn't been challenges, then when a challenge does come right in front of you, then you may not have the skills. So don't be afraid of taking on things that aren't necessarily easy and that are challenging, because it's like a muscle. You keep using it. So I don't think people have to go through the same path I did. They don't have to have these financial difficulties. But if people look back on their life, I'm sure there's a number of stories where at the time it was awful. But after a while, if they use that opportunity for their benefit, they'll be like, oh, my life would be so much different if I didn't go through that trial. People just shouldn't be afraid or avoid challenging situations, because that has positive impacts. And it's my own perspective. I think that's how we're built.
That's really smart, because I'm finding that we still have this society of, taking risks is bad and making mistakes is bad. But we really need to reframe this. Like, do things that are uncomfortable, make mistakes so that you can learn, so that when something really bad happens to you, it's not a disaster. You have tools, you have the skills, and I think that's still lacking. So let's keep promoting this idea. I like it.
Yeah.
And I have to ask you before you go, I'm assuming, since you're big on the FIRE community, that you listened to the Susie Orman interview with Paula Pant?
Most definitely. That was so entertaining. And so I was a contrarian on that one. A lot of people from the FIRE movement really had a negative reaction, and I loved it. I love the fact that she challenged the status quo. And for people who don't know who Suze is, she's like that financial guru in the United States. I don't listen to much of her show or read her books, but it created a great conversation. And it's one of those challenges that we need to just embrace. It's like, okay, someone has challenged us. Let's take it on.
So just a quick summary. Paula Pant is the host of Afford Anything podcast, and she's also, she probably has achieved FIRE. I believe she has like multiple, tens of properties all over the place. Not that she intends to retire ever, according to her, but she had Susie Orman on as a guest, and she's sort of coming out of retirement, and she said she hates the FIRE movement, and I think from what I've read recently, she kind of had a different interpretation of what it is, focusing more on the retiring part. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And this is actually a debate that's within the FIRE community of people who state that they want to retire early. A lot of people say they want to have the option whether they want to and when they want to, right? And so for Susie Orman, she had a certain perspective that you won't have enough if you retire early and something bad happens. So you got to be prepared for those emergency situations, be it health, be it a catastrophe. And so she was a bit extreme in her position, and I think she approached it from a lack of knowledge, and she eventually came to loving the FIRE movement, right? So we sort of won her over after we provided her with more information. But she made some good points of being able to really think through what retirement looks like and whether you are really ready, either mentally, but also when it comes to emergency situation, and you're able to sort of go through life's challenges that way.
And so the way that I see it now, after hearing what you're saying and what she said and what everyone else has been saying about FIRE, it just seems like you're trying to get to the point where you have the option to, say, work less or do a different job, and maybe your basic expenses are covered and you don't have to worry as much. And it's not necessarily about stopping at the age of 35 and going to play golf for the next 70 years. Because, maybe you won't be able to afford that, and if something happens, you're not ready, right?
Exactly. And I think it's really speaking to people's desire to have freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of what attracted me, and just being able to think about where your finances are, reaching that number that you can sort of have as a goal, but also taking the steps to make sure your financial house is in order and that you're thinking about your future, not just in the now. And I think what I appreciated with the dialogue that came after that interview was the ability for people to speak about things that are even unspoken in the fire community, is dealing with those emergencies, talking about insurance, talking about what you're going to do if you reach that pinnacle of being able to possibly retire early, because there's other challenges after that, right, in regards to what you want to do with your life. And not very many people tackle that question, right, because we're so busy. And taking the time to do that will actually allow you to get to a place that you may not have thought about before.
Yeah, they're focusing on the journey of saving the money or not spending the money and building up the net worth. And there is less discussion about what happens when you get there.
Exactly.
Well, this is very enlightening. I really love the idea and the theme of freedom that you're expressing, and just the idea of, more education, more information, and reaching financial independence is just your freedom to then do whatever it is that you want to do with the rest of your life. If you do feel trapped, I mean, you can feel free earlier in life. Of course, it's there's different ways. There's different ways to do FIRE, but there's also, you don't have to do FIRE. You can still find your freedom without it.
Most definitely, it's so much more than finances. It's so much more than a number. It's just being able to ask yourself the right questions and find your goals, like what drives me is my values and my goals, and making sure there's an alignment there, right? So just being able to understand that my path has been one direction, but when it comes to finances, we all need to be comfortable with it, and we all need to be able to match it up to who we are as individuals, as families, as a community, because if there is a disagreement in regards to your values and your finances, then it's going to show up in other ways.
That's totally right. Well, thanks so much, Fred. prairiefirecanada.com. Is that right?
Yep.
And people can people send you an email, ask questions about anything that you've said?
Yeah, if people want to reach out to me, I'm on Twitter at prairiefire_CA. I also have email you can reach me at mr.prairiefire@gmail.com. And yeah, I'm always open to talking about my journey and exploring with other people. And I just love talking about this stuff and sort of spreading the good news of the fire community.
Well, we're glad to have you in as another member of the Canadian Personal Finance contingent. So welcome, and keep spreading the good word.
Thank you so much, and you keep doing what you're doing. I love the podcast, and I'll definitely be listening in the future. And, yeah, anytime.
All right, thanks, Fred. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or however you get your podcasts. And while you're there, leave me a review. If you're already a subscriber, thanks so much. I'd love to get your feedback on this episode in my new Facebook group. To find the group, go to Facebook and search for The Personal Finance Show. Once you're approved, you'll be able to interact with me and the previous guests of the show and other fans as well. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Personal Finance Show. Next week, my guest will be Zena Amundsen, certified divorce financial analyst and author of the book, The Heart of Your Money.